it was made to spur me onward. It did work. So beyond theology, mathematics, of course, we have also studied things like alchemy, introducing elements, concoctions of different substances.
In the basement of Johanneborg was an alchemical furnace that I used for studies and studying the aspects of the various components of the Earth to see if they could be connected to what's happening in the heavens. And as we know, that anyone, I believe, has alchemy consisted, even though astrology is now no longer in fashion. Do tell me that you are still alchemists from time to time, yes?
Yes, we just renamed it a little bit.
Oh, very well.
Chemistry.
Very well. Oh, just a change in one letter, we'll accept it.
It's all chemistry. Yes.
But the notion that the heavens were connected somehow to the ways of chemistry, as you say, on the Earth, this is the reason why we say someone is mercurial in their attitudes, or why someone is Saturnalian in their lethargy. It is because perhaps there is the connection. And I firmly believe this. When I laid out the plans for Johanneborg, they were laid out with mathematical and alchemical precision so as to align to the coordinate directions. And my gardens were such that I studied apothecary as well, because we all know that alchemy and health were inextricably connected. To answer the rest of your question, I was intended to study the law when I was at University of Copenhagen. And then eventually I left Copenhagen and studied in Rostock, and it is there where I was, how should we say, smitten into astronomy. Yes.
Do any of your instruments still exist?
That, you will have to answer this question, but if I were to somehow understand across the days, would you know, sir?
Well, 9 years after you fell asleep in a sort of permanent slumber. Okay.
Sounds very relaxing.
Your younger colleague was able to actually make some improvements on telescopes, because Galileo and some other people in the Netherlands were able to take two different lenses and put them in a tube and make telescopes.
Yes, the double refraction.
Yes, the double refraction. So your colleague here was able to go on and even improved on the Galilean telescope and had a Keplerian telescope. So it was discovered that Venus had phases, and that is what led to the victory of the elliptical orbits and the
so you were
somewhat
this
Copernican
secret
system.
until now.
Yes, yes. You unfortunately perished. You went somewhere else 9 years before you had the opportunity for Kepler and others to make these exquisite measurements.
I remember.
Probably you had a really bad tummy ache.
Just
Yes, I recall.
the last thing I remember was sitting in drinking wine and beer with the burger of Wittenberg, I believe it was, and it was impolite to leave the table to relieve oneself. So the last thing I remember was rather, shall we say, an inability to relieve oneself. So yes, but that's the last thing I remember.
Yes, it was unfortunate. As we spoke of alchemy and apothecary, and I have tried my very best to revive you and to bring you back to good health, but unfortunately it was not to be.
I find that hard to believe that you had your eyes on my data for many years to come, so I imagine you were absconded with them. I don't have a question.
Yes, addressing this to you, Tycho. Don't be dismayed because this Congress of Astronomers has dismissed your geocentric theory. If you leave this room and go out into the streets, you will find many, many people that still believe in it. Keep heading south and you'll find more and more.
So some things have not changed over hundreds of years, yes? So,
question for Johannes. I was thinking of your instruments and the primary measurements that you make, and then I think of equal areas at equal time, I guess with regard to
the second law, yes.
It seems to me that final principle is quite far removed from your primary measurements, and it must indeed have taken some clever math to see through all that.
Indeed. As many have said, I have seen...
In fact, I'm curious how you get the distances. You can measure angles well enough.
oh, you remember that, if I interject, that speaking of Copernicus, and credit where it is due, it was Copernicus who established in De Revolutionibus the, how should we say, the distance ratios of the planets just through simple triangulation of the locations of the planets where they are at elongation and opposition. And it was known not so much the distance in these miles, so we measure in miles in the Americas, the distance between the objects, but we knew that the ratios, and these are the ratios that Kepler would use. But I think that with your discovery, which we have since been informed of, that the planets do not travel, and this was the mystery of Mars, was that it does not travel in a circle.
They are moving in elliptical orbits. Their speeds are variable, yes. And there is, of course, a curious ratio between the square of their period and the cube of their radius, these distances. And so this curious ratio that all the planets obey seems to suggest to me a common reason for the planets to be moving about the sun. What this is, I am not so certain, but there's definitely some suggestion of connectedness between these heavenly bodies.
Well, and there is something to be said for Kepler's willingness to depart from his theories, which we have now learned to be somewhat held in fantastical ill repute. But to his credit, that there was a time when Copernicus thought that all of the planets traveled in perfect circles, as did Ptolemy, as did Eudoxus, as did Aristarchus. The perfection of the circle was undeniable, yes, but it was Kepler who realized that if the planet Mars did in fact travel in an ellipse is no more than a conic section, the same way a circle is a conic section, or a parabola is a conic section. So it shows that if one is willing to break away from their inherent prejudices, that if you are opening your mind, that if something turns out to be, no matter how heartfelt it is to your being, to your original assumption, that you may have to discard it and go in a new direction and perhaps be rewarded by something that is as elegant as that the planets travel in conic sections. That's it.
I was kind of curious about the mathematics going from geometry to calculation now. In those days, did they have the concept of decimals, or did they use Roman numerals? It seems to me to be really cumbersome to be able to do things in Roman numerals.
And now you understand why I hired Kepler. These tediums are something that he found essential. But the use of measuring in a decimal system had been established by Simon Stevens in Belgium, in Bruges, a mathematician. And by that time, that the utility of that had trumped. Although ecclesiastical mathematicians in let's say in Italy and in the Jesuit schools would still be instructed in using the numeral systems prior to the Arabic system, but we would have used these mathematical abstractions, and especially Kepler. I logged data; he was the calculator. Madam.
Just out of curiosity, did you have the concept of negative numbers?
Well, we understand that concept of subtraction.
Yeah.
But in my world, I wouldn't have to go out and calculate sort of like the negative number of planets I saw that evening. So it was, but yes, mathematics had been established for quite some time. The Pythagoras, who established the 5 perfect solids, as you know, for those of you who have studied Pythagoras, we understand that his when my cross staff uses the Pythagorean theorem, yes, but you may not know that Pythagoras also was a member of a lunatic cult based on things called irrational numbers. So the notion that the square root of 2 would be enough to throw someone overboard from a boat to keep that secret. So yes, the sophistication of mathematics was there. And in fact, I would venture to say that mathematics would have been the most sophisticated of the sciences, and the ones that had less deviations and less susceptibility to being personal prejudices. One can believe that 2 and 2 is 3, but it is not the case. Yes, sir.
In your time, did you do your own arithmetic, or did you have the room full of computers in the original sense of that title?
It was Herr Kepler
Yes.
did most of the arithmetic on his own.
Pages and pages of manuscript, yes.
I was fortunate enough on Wien that I could invite scholars, young men who had been studying in the various colleges in Europe, from all over Europe, all the way down to the Italian states and England, came to Johannesburg and did the calculations for me, which was a privilege of having a royal patronage, yes. So it was common that there were 20, 30 young gentlemen who would be doing observational calculations, especially on the evenings when it was impossible to do observations. After, of course, we would have a banquet with the moose and the dwarf and the like. Yes, sir.
Could Kepler tell us one more time in simple terms what is Kepler's law and how you figured that out?
Yes. So I have 3 laws of planetary motion. The first is simply that the planets move in elliptical orbits about the Sun, which is located at one of the 2 foci. The second law, perhaps we could call it the law of equal areas, will suggest that the movement of the planets about the Sun is variable. And so the planets will sweep out, a planet will sweep out equal areas if drawing a line from the planet to the Sun in equal time periods around its orbit.
And how
so
do you figure that out?
the calculations have been years and years in coming to resolve the elliptical patterns.
If one simply draws an ellipse, it's not too particularly challenging to calculate the area based on where it is